From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. President Biden calls for unity at home and abroad in his first State of the Union. Ukrainians flee capital as 40-mile-long Russian military convoy reaches Kiev. Russia hits with more sanctions and responds with counter-sanctions. Palestinians object to France's position on Jerusalem. Educator aiming to become first Muslim elected to Connecticut State House. Scientists warn that climate change is already driving mass mortalities of species. And our top story tonight. In his first State of the Union, President Biden outlined a unity agenda consisting of policy where there are historically been support from both Republicans and Democrats. His speech came at the heel of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and unprecedented sanctions on Russia. As part of this unity agenda, he announced a strategy to address our national mental health crisis. President said our country faces an unprecedented mental health crisis amongst people of all ages. 2 out of 5 adults report symptoms of anxiety or depression, and Black-brown communities are disproportionately undertreated. President said our youth have been particularly impacted as losses from COVID and disruptions in routines and relationships have led to increased social isolation, anxiety, and learning loss. In the State of the Union, the President called on Congress to strengthen private protection, ban targeted advertising to children, and demand technology companies stop collecting personal data on our children. President also announced launching the 988 Crisis Response Line and strengthened community-based crisis response. Satellite images show a Russian military convoy stretching about 40 miles just north of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, which has already repulsed several assaults. The Russian army told Kyiv residents they can freely leave by a single highway, raising fears of an all-out attack. Ukrainians fear it is the last safe day in Kyiv as they flood into a train station in the capital, attempting to catch a ride to safety as invading Russian troops close in.
We are living today because we are very scared to be killed by Russian soldiers. We are very scared to receive a rocket to our underground, our house, and we try to live just to stay alive. We left our grandfather, our grandmother, and our flat with every stuff that we had. We just have a little bag and our dog.
The US and European Union have imposed sweeping new penalties aimed at crippling Russia's economy. EU sanctions announced Sunday banned the supply of all goods and technology linked to aircraft. Switzerland has also enacted penalties on Russia abandoning its traditional neutrality. Meanwhile, TikTok has blocked Russian-backed outlets such as RT and Sputnik in the EU, a company spokesman told CNN. It follows similar moves by Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram. MasterCard and Visa have blocked some Russian activity on their payment networks. FIFA and UEFA have suspended Russian national and club teams from all international football competitions. The US has blocked Russian financial institutions from making transactions in American dollars. Russia has responded with counter-sanctions, banning Russian residents from transferring foreign currency abroad. Russia has also shut down its airspace to airlines from 36 countries. A special segment on the current situation is coming up later tonight in our show, so keep watching Muslim News. Anti-nuclear groups on Monday decried the results of a referendum in Belarus allowing the country to host Russian nuclear weapons. The European Union warned the development puts the entire planet on a very dangerous path. Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, was among those calling the referendum vote into question. He said the vote was orchestrated by President Alexander Lukashenko in a context of widespread human rights violations. He called out the government's brutal repression against all segments of the Belarusian society. The reported results show more than 65% of the voters supporting changes to the constitution, including a renunciation of the country's neutral and non-nuclear status. Palestinians rallied in the Gaza Strip Monday protesting statements by French Premier Jean Castex, declaring Jerusalem as the eternal capital of the Jewish people. Castex spoke Friday during a gala dinner hosted by the Representative Council of French Jewish Institutions. Palestinian protesters, in response, waved a banner reading, "Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Palestine," during Monday's rally in the western city of Khan Yunis. Jerusalem is at the heart of the Israel-Palestine occupation. Palestinians are hopeful that occupied East Jerusalem may eventually become the capital of a future Palestinian state. Hundreds of reports chronicling decades of attacks in Indian-held Kashmir have disappeared from local newspaper archives. It includes one of the most comprehensive NGO reports on decades of violence and killing in the disputed region, which was published by a respected rights organization. The disappearance also includes the Greater Kashmir newspaper's report on the killing of 16-year-old Ishtiaq Ahmed Kande and 2 other people, as well as the 2012 death of Sajjad Ahmed Dar in a hospital after being in police custody, published by the Kashmiri Reader. Critics call it an Orwellian effort to expunge history and control the narrative going forward. Reporters Without Borders has rated India as 142nd level below Afghanistan and Burma in its World Press Freedom Index.
So it's still very mysterious how the archives disappeared and why. But then it does seem there is some deliberate, pattern to it, because suddenly at about the same time, archives of other Kashmir-based newspapers are missing.
We'll bring more news stories after the break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs,
and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell issued a statement in response to reports that Republican Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar spoke at a white nationalist event. The America First Political Action Conference in Orlando was organized by Nicholas Fuentes, a white nationalist activist. Fuentes rose to prominence after attending the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017. Greene of Georgia attended the conference in person, while Gosar of Arizona addressed attendees in a 30-second pre-recorded video. McConnell said there's no place in the Republican Party for white supremacists or anti-Semitism. Greene recently told right-wing podcast host Alex Jones that McConnell and his wife, former Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, are fully bought and paid for by China. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR's Connecticut chapter, is calling for a probe into a possible hate crime involving 2 female Muslim students at the University of Connecticut. Junior Shahzadeh Khatun and senior Zena Saleh said a man screamed racial slurs at them, including the N-word, as they walked to their dorm Monday night. The women believed they were targeted because they wear headscarves. CAIR Connecticut Chair Farhan Mehman called the incident unacceptable and disturbing. He said campus police should launch a hate crime investigation and urged the university to take action so an incident like this never occurs again. A 37-year-old Pennsylvania man connected to the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol riot ended his own life on February 25th, according to investigators. Matthew Perna pleaded guilty in December to entering and remaining in a restricted building or grounds and other charges stemming from the January 6th Capitol riot. That includes obstruction of an official proceeding, aiding and abetting, disorderly and disruptive conduct on a restricted building or grounds, and disorderly conduct in a Capitol building. Perna was inside the Capitol building for 20 minutes and posted a video of his actions to social media, prosecutors said. He later claimed that he was pushed inside the Capitol building by the rioting mob. He was scheduled to be sentenced on April 1st. Educator and activist Mariam Khan, a Democrat running for Connecticut's 5th District seat, representing Hartford and Windsor, could become the first Muslim elected to the State House. The seat was vacated after the resignation of incumbent Brandon McGee Jr. Tuesday is the special election for State House races. Khan said she had been endorsed by Democrats, several local unions, and received a lot of support from the local and town community. If elected, she will join another Muslim state leader, Dr. Saud Anwar, who made history as the first Muslim elected to the Connecticut State Senate in 2019. A Michigan judge ruled it is unconstitutional for state prison authorities to discriminate between allowing Muslim kufis versus Jewish yarmulkes worn by prisoners. John Patrick Moore II, an observant Muslim who is an inmate with the Michigan Department of Corrections, or MDOC, alleged in a lawsuit that prison policies violated his religious freedoms. MDOC's policies limited Moore's ability to wear a kufi in the prison, the lawsuit alleged. The department changed its policy in February of 2021 and now permits male Muslims to always wear the kufi or Muslim skullcap. Judge George Karam Stee determined there is existing legal precedent that forbids Muslim prisoners from wearing their kufis at all times, violates their constitutional rights. Sixth Circuit case law holds that free exercise clause of the First Amendment prohibits prison regulations that infringe on prisoners' sincerely held beliefs. Heat waves, droughts, and floods caused by climate change already exceed what plants and animals can tolerate, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. Global warming is causing the extinction of species and mass mortalities events in trees and mammals, according to ecologist Camille Parmesan. Parmesan, a University of Texas at Austin Geological Sciences adjunct professor, is amongst the authors of the latest IPCC report. The effects of climate change are occurring much faster and are more disruptive and more widespread than are expected 20 years ago, the report shows. It also notes millions of people globally are being exposed to acute food and water insecurity. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the current situation of Russian invasion of Ukraine, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Now we're being told that 665,000 people have become refugees from Ukraine. Why is Russia keep pushing this war further and further? We have someone who has been writing on these issues, James CARDEN. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
James CARDEN is contributing columnist at Asia Times and have served for 1 year as an advisor to U.S.-Russia Bilateral Presidential Commission at the State Department. James, does that commission still exist?
No, it doesn't. It ended sometime towards the end of Mr. Obama's second term, if I'm not mistaken. It certainly didn't survive the Trump years.
So does it mean that, is that one of the examples, or there are many other examples that America has not been studying what's going on in Russia?
Well, unfortunately, the commission and many attempts at diplomacy have been gutted and or outright opposed by Congress and by many of the lobbyists with a lot of money and prestige and power, such as the British oligarch and former American William Browder, who lobbied for the Magnitsky Act in 2012. That was probably the beginning of the end for the commission and for good relations between the United States and Russia.
So why is Putin, in your view, invading Ukraine?
It's something that there was always a implied threat that it might come to this. So by way of some background, Russia has, even before Vladimir Putin came on the scene, they have been warning the United States not to expand NATO. And this has been going on for years. And Putin has made it very clear that these are red lines for them. And no less an expert as William Burns, who is now the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mr. Burns was ambassador to Russia, and then he was Deputy Secretary of State. He is an extremely well-respected and esteemed expert on the country. And he wrote to Washington in 2008. This is what he said. I'm reading from it now. Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for Russia. I have yet to find anyone who views Ukraine and NATO as anything other than a direct challenge to Russian interests. So for many years, the Russians have been raising their, forcefully raising their objections to NATO expansion. We never have listened. In December of this past year, the Russians once again tried to negotiate a settlement whereby Ukraine would become neutral. They would not join NATO. They would, and the United States and NATO both rejected the Russian request, and now we're at war. Now, this isn't to say that Vladimir Putin is right. It's not to defend his actions, which are clearly illegal and immoral. However, we cannot say that we weren't warned. And there was no good reason from a U.S. national security interest, nor from the interests of NATO security, for Ukraine to join the NATO alliance. All of this could have been avoided with a simple pledge that that Ukraine would not join NATO. But we insisted. That that was really a decision to be left to the Ukrainians, and this is the Russian response. It's a great tragedy.
Once you wrote, I think in 2014, that it is the personal dislike of Putin, which is driving a whole lot of policies here. Do you still believe that?
Yes, I do. It is a part of the problem is that we never really took Putin at his word, because since at least 2007 and maybe before, remember that Putin, of course, was a very vocal opponent of the Iraq War. So that earned him the ire of the neoconservatives in the United States. And in 2007, at a speech in Munich, he basically said that he was no longer going to follow the American lead, and he was striking out on his own. And he was going to pursue a foreign policy that was for Russian interests, and that deeply offended the U.S. establishment. There's another part of this, which is kind of a culture war element, and this has emerged over the past several years. And Putin is basically an old line Russian conservative. Russia is basically overall a very conservative society, and that offends our Washington, D.C. based policymakers for the most part, who believe that America's mission is to spread liberal values around the world. Well, the Russians object to this project, and a number of sensible Americans object to it as well, but it's an article of faith here in Washington that we have to spread liberal values and remake societies that are different from ours into replicas of our own. That's a very dangerous project. So it's driven by mistaken strategic considerations, and I think very much by a culture war element.
So is there a way out for the peace at this moment? It seems that if NATO expansion was something which Putin was opposing, and as you said, he has repeatedly, and he wanted it to be neutral and all that. Now they have threatened Finland and Sweden, who are contributing arms to Ukraine. So has Putin move essentially strengthening NATO even further?
I think that's possible. I know that the Finns, you read the same report then that I did, that they are considering joining the alliance. What the invasion and Putin's rather brazen military incursion into Ukraine, I think, has done, though, has eliminated the possibility of Ukraine joining the alliance in the very same way that his invasion of Georgia in 2008 took Georgian ascension into the alliance off the table. I don't see any way that we could possibly allow, that the alliance could allow Ukraine to join, given the immense, reaction that it's that is received from Putin. So, in a way, you're going to see defense expenditures increase all across the continent, but there's no appetite really for a direct conflict with the Russians. And we've seen that just in the past several days. There were reports that a number of NATO members were going to be supplying aircraft, attack aircraft and fighters to Ukraine. And within a matter of hours, the General Secretary of NATO and the President of Poland said that wasn't on the table at all. So there isn't an appetite in the West for a fight on the ground with Russia, nor for escalation. And I think that President Biden's response so far to calls, even within his own party, for a no-fly, to institute a no-fly zone, or to fund an insurgency based on the Afghanistan model of the early 1980s, Biden has pretty clearly rejected those options, and I think that that's very wise. The only way that we can resolve this is at the negotiating table, and with a pledge of Ukrainian neutrality. That's the only way out.
What is the possibility of Ukrainian who are talking pretty high, being appreciated, and some photos are emerging of their braveries? They will do to Russia at this moment what Afghans did to Russia, to Soviet Union. Is there a possibility that these states, while they're not directly involved, not imposing a no-fly zone, but they will continue to provide small arms to people? I mean, Ukrainians know how to fight, right?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the news coverage that we've seen over the past few days, remember, I think we're only in day 5 or 6 of the invasion. And to give some perspective on that, I know that news reports coming out of CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times are commenting on how slow the Russian invasion is going, and that they're encountering fierce resistance in pockets, and that might be so. But to give you some perspective, it took the United States 2 weeks to reach Baghdad against, a largely undefended country. So this is by no means at an end or at a stalemate. Indeed, from what we can tell, the fiercest fighting so far is happening tonight. And I don't hold out much hope that the Ukrainians, as valiant as they are fighting, can hold out for much longer. And I can't imagine when we look back on this, given the losses, that we will be able to say that a very vague promise from NATO that Ukraine will join someday, was worth all of this. The responsible thing for Ukrainian President Zelensky, the responsible thing for him to have done, would have been to accept neutrality. But he didn't do that. He was egged on by the United States and European defense establishments, and it's a disaster for his country. And it's a terribly sad thing to watch.
At the United Nations, one understands that China did not support the US resolution, but why India and the United Arab Emirates, they decided to abstain as well?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all. India has immense economic interests with Russia. I think that they wisely are now, as they largely did during the first Cold War, play both sides against one another. That is strategically, that makes a lot of sense. And the UAE has immense monetary interests with Russia. And I think we might also note that the Israelis seem to be playing both sides of the game as well. So I'm not terribly surprised that you have non-European countries that are not wholly dependent on the United States, like India and China, just striking out on their own.
What is this conversation and some news item of neo-Nazis being part of the Ukrainian army?
Part of that is true. Part of that is grounded in actual fact. Now, when Mr. Putin announced, I think it was on the 21st of February, that he was going to recognize the breakaway republics, and he mentioned that there was going to be a program of denazification for the rest of Ukraine. That was hyperbole, but it is a matter of fact that there are neo-Nazi battalions, such as the Azov battalion, that have been rolled into the regular Ukrainian army. For reasons of history relating to the Second World War, the Russians find that extremely provocative and offensive, and they wish to stamp it out. I would also note that the Azov battalion is based in Mariupol, Ukraine, and I believe that that is where you're going to see some of the most fierce Russian attacks because of its association with Azov. And I would also take this opportunity to note that the people in Eastern Ukraine, the Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine, have been bearing the brunt of this conflict for 8 years. In April of 2014, Kyiv more or less declared war. They declared an anti-terrorist operation aimed at the Russian-speaking Donbass. So I have noticed a lot of sympathy and understandable sympathy for what the people in Kyiv and in Western Ukraine, what they're going through. But there seems to be very little realization that the vast majority of the casualties of the war that's been going on since 2014 have been in the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I mean, that's a war that has killed over 14,000 people. There have been 1.2 or 3 million displaced people because of that. So the tragedy of Ukraine didn't begin last week. It began 8 years ago.
Tell me this, James. Where do you see U.S.-Russia relations in 5 years from now?
It's anyone's guess. I'd be. It's impossible to know. I think a lot of it has to do with what occurs in 2024. So in 2024, Mr. Putin will either continue on as president or he'll step aside. I don't see a lot of hope for good U.S.-Russian relations or even civil U.S.-Russian relations while Mr. Putin is on the scene because of this invasion. If someone else takes the reins in a couple of years, then perhaps we can work towards improving relations. But I have absolutely no hope that we'll have any chance at decent relations so long as Mr. Putin remains at the head of Russia.
Last question, let me ask you this. Everybody is coming up with sanction and sanction. Every morning you wake up and there are new sanctions out there. If Iran and North Korea can survive despite sanctions, do you think these sanctions will have any major effect on Russia?
I think it could have a major economic effect on Russia. The problem with sanctions is that there's no proof that they've ever changed the behavior of the states at which they're targeted against. So it will cause a lot of pain to ordinary Russians, just as the sanctions against Iran have caused terrible suffering there, and the sanctions against Syria have caused terrible suffering there. But there's no evidence to suggest in the long history of sanctions that it has ever brought a regime to its knees or to change its behavior. So I think it's a policy that we're addicted to using in Washington, and I think that that's unfortunate because it really hurts the people who. It hurts ordinary people. It hurts people who have the least amount of responsibility for the policies of their own government.
Well, thank you so much, James, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
James Carden is contributing columnist for Asia Times. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.